My name is Ethan Caldwell, and for the past 9 years I've been anchoring my existence in the restless sprawl of Boston, a city where cobblestone streets twist through history, where bitter winters cloak the skyline in frost, and where the hum of old brick meets the gleam of new steel. For nearly a decade I thought I'd constructed something unshakable, a steady career as a civil engineer, molding the bones of this city with bridges that span the Charles River and tunnels that burrow beneath its streets. A cozy brownstone in Back Bay, its bay windows casting a warm glow against the snowdrifts piling up outside, and a wife, Sara, whose smile once illuminated my world like a lighthouse cutting through fog. That smile, it snared me 10 years ago, at a friend's pub crawl in Fenway, a quick radiant burst as she leaned over a pint of stout, her brown eyes catching mine across a crowded bar thick with laughter and spilled beer. It was the glue that held us together through the lean years, me grinding through grad school on coffee and willpower, her juggling freelance design gigs with a tenacity I admired. Through the crisp October day, I proposed, under the drooping willows of the public garden, her laughter ringing bright against the rust-colored leaves as she said yes. For years that smile was my refuge, a constant in a life I'd built with care, until it warped into something foreign, a shadow that coiled around everything I thought I knew and squeezed until it cracked. The fracture didn't strike like a thunderbolt. It crept in slow and insidious, a fault line I didn't notice until it had torn too wide to mend. Sara worked as a graphic designer for a fast-growing firm downtown, a job that sent her crisscrossing the country, client meetings in New York that ran late into the night, workshops in Chicago where she'd sketch ideas over wine, pitches in Miami that left her voice hoarse over the phone. I'd grown accustomed to her absences, filling the stillness of our brownstone with my own rhythms, drafting blueprints until my eyes blurred under the desk lamp's harsh light, running along the Charles River as the dawn broke grey and frigid, over the water, sipping coffee in our kitchen while the city stirred outside, its horns and shouts filtering through the old windows. I'd always loved her spark, the way she could sketch a logo that stopped you dead in your tracks, her lines sharp and bold, or charm a client with a single flash of that disarming grin. She was a burst of life in a way I'd never been, her energy a counterpoint to my quiet precision, and I'd been proud to be the steady ground beneath her whirlwind. But over the past year, that whirlwind turned elusive. Her trips stretched from days to weeks, her stories shrank to one-word answers, her presence in our home felt more like a visitor's than a partner's. Big pitch in Philly, she'd say, her voice airy as she packed her suitcase, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders in waves she didn't bother to tame. Team retreat in DC, can't skip it. I'd nod, force a smile, and bury the unease under my work. Blueprints spread across the dining table, deadlines ticking like a metronome, concrete pours scheduled at dawn, telling myself it was just the price of her ambition. We were fine. Weren't. But the signs were there, piling up like cracks in a foundation I'd spent years reinforcing. Her phone buzzed at strange hours, midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., the screen lighting up with names I didn't recognize. Client, team lead, Mark. She'd swipe it away when I glanced over from the couch, her smile tight and fleeting, a flicker that didn't reach her eyes. Just work stuff, she'd mutter, flipping the phone face down on the counter, her fingers lingering on the case, as if guarding it. Then came the hints, subtle at first but growing sharper, a trace of citrus and spice on her scarf, a cologne I didn't wear, its edge cutting through the familiar vanilla she dabbed on her wrists. A receipt slipped from her bag one night, a rooftop bar in Philly, $75 for 2 cocktails and a plate of oysters, dated a Tuesday when she'd texted me about a late meeting with the team. A silver bracelet appeared on her wrist, new, delicate, its links catching the light. When I asked, she waved it off with a laugh. A gift from the crew, client liked the pitch. I'm not a loud man. I've always leaned on plans over panic, facts over shouting matches. So I swallowed it, the doubt, the questions, buried them under early morning runs through the icy streets, my breath fogging in the air, and late nights, at the office poring over structural loads, convincing myself I was reading too much into it. Marriage shifts, I told myself, like seasons or tides. But tides don't lie, and deep down, I knew something was buckling beneath the surface. It started 6 months ago, faint at first, a tremor I could brush aside. She came home from a Chicago trip in April, her eyes bright but distant, her kiss quick and perfunctory as she dropped her bag by the door. "How was it?" I asked, flipping. Pancakes in the kitchen, the sizzle of batter filling the quiet as I glanced over my shoulder. "Good. Busy," she said, her voice clipped, already halfway to the bedroom with her coat still on, leaving a trail of damp footsteps from the spring. Rain outside. No details, no stories, no trace of the laughter that used to spill out of her when she'd recount a client's quirks or a late-night brainstorm gone hilariously wrong, just a nod and a closed door that clicked shut behind her. Then the late nights multiplied. Texts she'd answer in the hall, her giggles soft and guarded, filtering through the walls as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I'd listen, the brownstone silent except for the creak of its old oak floors under her, pacing, wondering who was on the other end making her laugh like that, a sound that didn't belong to me anymore. One morning in June, I found a hotel keycard in her coat pocket, Hyatt Regency, Philly, its glossy plastic cool against my fingers, a place she hadn't mentioned when she'd said her trip was all Marriott and conference rooms. "Work mix-up," she said when I held it up, her smile flashing too fast, her hands snatching it back and shoving it deep into her pocket as if I'd caught her with something forbidden. I let it slide, but the doubt took root, a low, persistent hum I couldn't tune out. By October, the hum was a roar. A whiff of cologne lingered on her jacket when she came back from New York, citrus and cloves, not my cedar, clinging to the wool like an unwelcome guest. A call she took in the bathroom at 1 a.m., her voice low and warm, the words muffled behind the door but the tone unmistakable, intimate, playful, alive, in a way she hadn't been with me in months. I stood in the kitchen, coffee gone cold in my hands, watching her shadow shift through the frosted glass, her laughter slipping out in bursts that felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. I didn't confront her, not then. I told myself I was too swamped with a bridge project downtown, too exhausted from sleepless nights, that I was imagining shadows where there were none. But one night, I couldn't dodge it anymore. She'd come home from a team dinner in D.C. on a chilly Friday, her breath sharp with gin and her coat still damp from the drizzle outside, and left her laptop open on the couch as she kicked off her boots. It pinged as I passed by, an email from Mark Tanner, her team lead, popping up on the screen. "Philly was wild, can't wait for round 2, drinks on me next time." My stomach plummeted, a cold wave crashing through me, chilling my hands as I gripped the armrest. Mark, a name she'd dropped casually over dinner months ago. A guy with a cocky grin and a handshake too firm at her firm's summer mixer, his eyes lingering on her a beat too long. I didn't sleep that night, the words searing into my skull. Like a brand, the truth clawing its way out from the dark where I'd kept it locked. I didn't explode, not yet. I went silent, deliberate, a man inspecting a structure on the verge of collapse. The next morning, while she slept off the gin, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the brownstone quiet except for the drip of the coffee maker and the faint hum of traffic outside. I started digging. Nothing dramatic, just a careful unraveling of the threads she'd left loose. Her email password was still the same one from grad school, her cat's name plus our anniversary, a detail she'd never bothered to change. I logged in, my hands steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat, and scrolled through her inbox. There they were, messages from Mark stretching back months, buried among client threads and spam. Loved that rooftop view in Philly. One read sent 2 weeks ago, followed by a winking emoji that made my jaw tighten. DC next week, let's make it a late one, another said, dated 3 days before her team dinner. Attachments too, selfies of them at a bar, her head tilted back in laughter, his arms slung around her shoulders, the city lights blurring behind them. I clicked out, my breath shallow, and checked her texts next. Synced to her laptop, another oversight. "Miss you already," he'd written after Chicago, her reply a heart emoji, and soon. Each word was a brick, stacking into a wall I couldn't unsee, a structure of deceit she'd built right under my nose. That night, November 10th, The wind howled through Boston, rattling the brownstone's windows like a warning. It was a Saturday, the clock ticking past 10:45 p.m., and I sat in the living room, a glass of bourbon in hand, its amber glow catching the flicker of a single lamp. Sara had texted earlier from the airport. "Delayed flight, home late, love you." I'd stared at that "love you" too long, a phrase that felt hollow now, a relic of a time when it meant something. Her latest trip, a client pitch, in Philly, had dragged from 2 days to 4, each delay chipping away at the trust I'd clung to like a lifeline. I'd called her that afternoon, but it went straight to voicemail, her chipper tone mocking me. "Hey, it's Sara. Leave." A message. I didn't bother. Instead, I sat there, the bourbon burning my throat, my mind replaying months of subtle shifts, her distracted glances, her rushed goodbyes, the way she'd stopped looking at me like I was her world. The front door swung open at 11:27, and her laughter hit me like a gust of icy wind, bright, unrestrained, almost giddy. It filled the brownstone, bouncing off the high ceilings, a sound so out of place it made my chest tighten. "Oh, honey," she called, her voice light and sing-song, dripping with a joy that didn't match the storm outside. She stumbled in, boots clacking on the hardwood, her coat dripping rain onto the rug, her bag tossed onto the hall table with a careless thud. That laugh, it wasn't the one I knew, not the warm, familiar sound that once spilled out over Sunday breakfasts or late-night movies. It was sharp, reckless, like she'd just stepped out of a life I wasn't part of. She didn't see me yet, first too lost in her own bubble, shrugging off her coat with a chuckle, her dark hair damp and wild from the wind. Then her eyes landed on the coffee table, and the air went still. There it was, a framed photo from our engagement day, a candid shot under those willows. Her in a sweater that hugged her frame, me grinning beside her, the leaves a golden blur behind us. But I'd changed it. Across the glass in thick black marker I'd scrawled, "I see everything." Her laughter choked off, her face draining to a ghostly white. She froze, one hand still on her coat, her brown eyes darting between me and the frame, her breath catching in her throat. I stood from the armchair, arms crossed, my voice low and steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Hey, Sara, what's so funny? Tell me, I could use a good story." Sara stood there, rooted to the hardwood floor of our Boston brownstone, her damp coat slipping from her fingers to pool at her feet like a shed skin. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago, bright, reckless, a stranger's sound, had vanished, replaced by a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Her brown eyes, wide with shock, darted between me and the framed engagement photo on the coffee table, its glass now scarred with my black marker scrawl, "I see everything." The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows, but inside, the air was still, heavy with the weight of what was coming. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling, but no words came at first, just a shallow breath that hitched in her throat. I stepped forward from the armchair, my arms still crossed, my bourbon glass abandoned on the side table, its amber contents glinting faintly in the lamplight. My voice cut through the quiet, low and steady, honed by months of buried rage. "Hey, Sara, what's so funny? Tell me, I could use a good story." Her hands twitched, then rose to her chest as if to shield herself, her fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. "Ethan, what is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking, the confidence that usually danced in her tone fracturing, like thin ice underfoot. Her eyes flicked back to the photo, then to me, searching my face for a clue, a hint of how much I knew. I let out a laugh of my own, sharp, bitter, a sound scraped from the hollow place she'd carved inside me. "Don't play dumb," I said, my tone hardening as I took another step closer, the floor creaking under my boots. "You think I'm that blind? All those trips, those late nights, that bracelet you didn't earn with a pitch, did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" Her lips parted again, but still nothing came, her gaze flickering with raw panic like a deer caught in headlights. I didn't give her time to regroup. "I've got it all, Sara. Want to see what I've been up to while you were working?" I reached for my laptop on the coffee table, flipped it open with a flick of my wrist, and hit play before she could protest. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow across her pale face. And there she was, Sara with him, Mark Tanner, her team lead, strolling arm in arm through a Philly park. The autumn leaves a cruelly vivid backdrop to their ease. Another clip rolled, them kissing outside a rooftop bar, her hands pressed to his chest, his grin wide and smug as he pulled her closer, the city skyline twinkling behind them like a mocking audience. Then photos, snapshots of them laughing, over drinks, her head tilted back in that same giddy laugh I'd just heard echo through our home, his arms slung around her shoulders like she belonged to him. I'd hired a private investigator 2 weeks ago, Tom's idea, after he'd seen me unraveling over beers at a dive bar near South Station. "Get proof, man," he'd said, his voice gruff. "Don't let her gaslight you." So I did. Paid a guy named Vince, a quiet ex-cop with a knack for blending into shadows, and he'd delivered a file that burned through every lie I'd swallowed. "Go ahead," I said, my voice rising, rough with fury as I pointed at the screen. "Tell me this is networking. Tell me how you've been screwing Mark while I've been here, keeping this life afloat, paying the mortgage, the car, your damn wardrobe." Her hands shot up, trembling, tears welling in her eyes and spilling over her lashes to streak down her cheeks. "Ethan, please, I can explain," she choked out, her voice breaking, but I cut her off, my anger erupting like a storm breaking loose over the harbor. "Explain? Explain how you've been living a double life while I've been killing myself at work? Funding your little getaways, your bar tabs, that bracelet I didn't buy?" I slammed the laptop shut, the thud echoing through the room like a gavel, the sound sharp enough to make her flinch. "You've lied to me, Sara. Every single day, every call, every time you said I love you. Are you sorry? Or just sorry I caught you?" My words hit her like blows, each one stripping away the mask she'd worn so well. And she staggered back a step, her shoulder bumping the wall as she clutched at it for support. She lunged forward then, tears streaming down her face, her hands outstretched as if she could pull me back from the edge I'd already leapt off. "Ethan, listen. It's not what it looks like. I swear." Her voice cracked, desperate, pleading, but I raised a hand, palm out, stopping her cold in her tracks. "Don't," I snapped, my tone hard as the steel beams I designed. "I've spent months piecing this together. Every text, every lie, every step you took with him. Want to know why?" She didn't answer, her sobs loud and ragged now, her body shaking as she sank against the hall table, knocking her bag to the floor with a clatter. "Because I had to be certain," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm, each word deliberate, weighted with the truth I'd fought to face, certain I wasn't losing my mind, that the woman I married, the woman I built this life with, wasn't stabbing me in the back every time she walked out that door. And now I'm certain. So I've made some choices. Her cries grew sharper, piercing the air like shards of glass, but they didn't touch me, not anymore. I'd drowned in her deceit too long to feel anything soft now, my heart a fortress she couldn't breach. I straightened, my stance firm, my words cold and precise as I laid out the wreckage she'd left me to salvage. First, I've filed for divorce. My lawyer's got the papers ready. You'll get them Monday. Check the prenup you signed without a second thought. It's ironclad. You walk away with what you brought in, nothing but your clothes and your lies. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with shock, a gasp tearing from her throat as if I'd struck her. "Ethan, no, you can't do this," she pleaded, her voice fracturing into a whisper, her hands reaching for me again. But I stepped back, out of her grasp. I ignored her, pressing on, my resolve unyielding. Second, I called Mark's girlfriend, Rachel, told her everything, sent her Vince's file. She didn't take it well. Turns out she's been tracking his business trips. 2, wondering why he's always working late. Sara's hands flew to her face, a wail escaping her lips, raw and guttural as she slid down the wall to the floor, her knees buckling under her. You told Rachel? Oh God, Ethan, why?" Her tears pooled on the hardwood, her body trembling, but I felt a bitter satisfaction curl in my chest, a smirk tugging at my lips. "She deserved to know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "And guess what? She's got her own proof. Caught him texting some other woman last month. You're not even his only side piece." Her sobs deepened, racking. Her frame as she curled into herself, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket, its black plastic cool against my fingers, and tossed it onto the coffee table with a sharp clack that made her flinch again. "And this," I said, my tone flat, final, "is the endgame. Every email, every photo, every receipt, yours and his. Fight me on this divorce, and it goes to your firm's HR. Let's see how they handle their star designer screwing her team." Lead on company time. She stared at the drive, then up at me, her face a ruin of mascara and despair, her breath hitching between sobs. "Ethan, I'm begging you. I messed up, I know. I love you. I was stupid, lost. We can fix this." Her words were a frantic plea, her hands clawing at the air as if she could pull back the life she'd torched, but they fell flat, echoing off a trust she'd shattered beyond repair. I laughed again, a low, hollow sound that carried no warmth, only the weight of betrayal finally set free. "Love, you call this love? You didn't love me, Sara. You loved the brownstone, the stability, the life I gave you while you played house with him, loyalty, respect. You traded that for a fling with some smug bastard who doesn't even care enough to stick around." She buried her face in her hands, her cries muffled against her palms, but all I felt was a strange clarity, a chain breaking, a weight lifting after months of suffocation. The truth had been clawing at me for weeks, months even, a beast I'd tried to cage with logic and denial. It started with those late-night buzzes, her phone lighting up, her quick, "It's just work," when I asked who. Then the evidence piled up, a receipt here, a scent there, a call I wasn't meant to hear, her voice soft and flirty through the bathroom door. I'd pushed it down, told myself I was paranoid, that I was too buried in bridge designs and deadlines to see straight. But that email, Philly was wild, cracked the cage wide open. I didn't confront her then. I went cold, methodical, like I was analyzing a failing structure. Vince's photos were the first blow, Sara and Mark, laughing, touching, living. A life I wasn't part of, but I kept digging. Her emails, her texts, a paper trail of deceit I'd followed step by step until I couldn't deny it anymore. I'd even tailed her once myself 2 months back, following her cab to a bar in Beacon Hill, watching from across the street as she leaned into him, her laugh cutting through the crowd like a knife through my chest. I'd recorded it, her voice, his grin, saved it all, not to destroy her but to free myself, to see the woman I'd loved for what she'd become. Now, standing over her crumpled form, I wielded that truth like a weapon. "You thought I'd stay blind forever," I said, my voice steady despite the fire roaring in my veins. "That I'd keep playing the fool while you laughed in my face, while you laughed coming through that door tonight? This is your reckoning. Sara?" She looked up, her eyes pleading through the tears, her mascara-streaked face a mirror of her collapse. "Ethan, please don't do this. I love you. I'll change. We can go to therapy, start over." Her voice broke, a desperate grasp at a lifeline I'd already cut. But it was too late. Far too late. I grabbed my coat from the rack by the door, my keys jangling in my hand, my tone final as I turned to her one last time. "I'm done. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Movers come Tuesday. Be out by then. Oh, and that credit card you used. Here in Philly. Cancelled this morning. Good luck explaining that to Mark." Her wails chased me as I stepped toward the door, raw and piercing, a sound that might have broken me once but now just faded into the wind. "Ethan, don't. Please. We can work through this. I need you." I paused, hand on the knob, and glanced back at her, her crumpled body against the wall, the photo, the USB, a tableau of her own making. "Some things don't get fixed," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through her cries. "You chose him. Over me, over us. Live with it." The door slammed shut behind me, her sobs swallowed by the storm as I stepped into the night. The Boston wind bit at my face, the rain soaking through my coat, but beneath the cold, a spark flared, freedom jagged and fierce, burning through the wreckage she'd left behind. I walked to my car, the city lights blurring past, my heart pounding with rage and release. I wasn't just leaving Sara, I was leaving the man who'd let her unravel him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to break. The Boston night swallowed me whole as I drove away from the brownstone, the rain hammering my windshield in relentless sheets, the wipers slashing back and forth like they could erase the past hour. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles. White, the bourbon's heat still lingering in my throat as I navigated the slick streets of Back Bay. Sara's wails, raw, desperate, pleading, faded into the storm behind me, drowned by the wind that howled through the city, rattling the tew. Old brick buildings and tugging at the bare trees lining the Charles River. I didn't look back. The rearview mirror stayed empty, a blank slate reflecting nothing but the blur of streetlights streaking past, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange, jagged freedom, a spark flickering beneath the cold rage that had fueled me out. The door. I wasn't just leaving Sara. I was shedding the man I'd become, the one who'd let her lies chip away at him, who'd built a life around her only to watch it crumble under her careless hands. The hotel was a nondescript box on the edge of downtown, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the grey sky, the lobby sterile and dim with the smell of cheap coffee and damp carpet. I checked in with a nod to the clerk, dropped my duffel bag on the thin mattress and stood at the window, staring out at the dark expanse of the harbour beyond the glass. The city hummed below, cars sloshing through puddles, horns cutting through. The night, but up here it was just me and the silence, a quiet I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Rachel, Mark's girlfriend. "Thanks for the truth, I'm out, we're better than this." I stared at her words, the screen's glow harsh against the dark, and let them sink in. She was right. We were. I'd spent 9 years pouring myself into Sara's world, my salary into her trips, my nights into her comfort, my trust into her promises, only to see her toss it aside for a fling with a guy who couldn't even stay loyal to his own lies. But now that world was mine to reclaim, and the thought lit something fierce inside me, a fire I hadn't known I still had. The next week was a blur of motion, lawyers, movers, a storm of logistics that kept my hands busy and my mind sharp. I met my attorney, a brisk woman named Karen, in her office overlooking the common, her desk piled with files as she walked me through the divorce papers. "Prenup's solid," she said, tapping the document with a pen. "She gets nothing. But what she brought, clothes, personal stuff, you keep the brownstone, the car, the accounts." I nodded, the weight of it settling in. Not victory, but justice, a line drawn in the sand. Sara's texts flooded my phone. Apologies, please. Excuses I'd heard before. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean it. We can still fix this." I deleted them all, each one a ghost of a life I didn't want back, and blocked her number by Wednesday. Movers came Tuesday, hauling her things, dresses she'd worn for him, sketchbooks she'd filled with ideas I'd never see, out. Of the brownstone in cardboard boxes stamped with her name. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them strip her presence away piece by piece until the place was mine again, its silence no longer heavy but clean, a blank page I could write on. She left a note, slipped under the door that night, her handwriting shaky on a torn scrap of paper. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please don't hate me." I read it once, the ink smudged with what might have been tears, and felt a flicker of something, grief maybe for the woman she'd been, but it passed quick. I crumpled it, tossed it into the trash with the takeout containers piling up in the kitchen, and moved on. The photo frame, the one I'd marked, was gone, tossed out with the mover's load, and the USB sat locked in a drawer, not a trophy but a reminder. I'd seen her lies, faced them head on, and walked away whole. The brownstone felt different. After that, emptier, yes, but lighter too. Its bay windows letting in the pale November sun without her shadow to dim it.